Presumption. I'm Sara Azari, and you guys are
Jim Griffin.
I think I'm Matt Fondelier, but it's been a while since I looked in the mirror.
Right. So I'm excited about this episode, you guys, because we're going to be joined by a great guest, Kerri Rawson, who I recently connected with on social media, where I connect with a lot of people these days when I'm hiding behind the screen working. And sort of along the lines of what she ends up offering us today in this interview, Jim, we should address the first the Lori Vallow sentence in Idaho, and also
today, actually
happened, yeah. And then the Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer, who went into custody recently, because that's really on point with the BTK killer, who it happens to be Kerri's dad. So in Idaho,
before we do that, can I ask the picture behind of your left shoulder? I've never noticed it before. It's like a black Twitter bird. Did you do that in honor of X taking over Twitter? Is that what that is?
Look, this is a what is this, like a compromise between the blue Twitter bird and then the black X. What is that X? I literally thought I had a porn app on my social media apps.
I think you do have a porn app on your social media. That's what it looked like to me when you posted it. But yeah, that's not healthy. A black X is not
a black X, and it's also very creepy. It's very porny. It really is. It's like the font is porny. Anyway, okay.
I'm sorry I interrupted you. We were talking about
Lori Vallow. So Jim, she got LWOP, life without the possibility of parole, on all counts of conviction, and she got, I believe, 15 years. She was facing 1 to 20 on the grand theft. Some of the sentences were concurrent, some consecutive. But to me, when you're dealing with LWOP, it's like I just tune out everything else that comes along, the restitution, right, the other counts, the staggering of consecutive versus concurrent. But what was absolutely mind blowing, you guys, for me, and I'm all about rehabilitation and giving the defendant a chance. I mean, that's what you and I try to do. But this woman deserved to go away. And I'll tell you something. She had no remorse. She called the murders accidents. Didn't really get into the facts, thank God, but she said that the murder victims, her children and her friend Tammy, who was Chad Daybell's wife, that they've all visited her from heaven, and they are happy and they are busy. And it was like, whoa. I mean, clearly she's not well. But it was obvious that from the prosecutor's pitch that she did not participate in the mental health evaluation that the pre-sentence investigation offers. So the judge had nothing to go by there. She had a mental health expert for the defense that came up with diagnoses such as delusional disorder, hyperreligiosity, and a personality disorder that includes narcissism. So these are some serious diagnoses, but there was no nexus made between how these illnesses could cause her to commit murders in this sort of heinous way that she did. And more importantly, Jim, there was no path to rehabilitation or treatment, right? And so this judge had no mitigation and no remorse. I don't know. Your face looks like you have a problem with me saying she needs to go stay in prison, but she really needs to go stay.
She killed her 2 kids and another person, according to the jury's findings. So she's going to get life without parole. Although
she got life without parole. What do you mean she's going to get?
I mean, she was going to get it the whole time. I mean,
okay.
No shock of what the result was. What I'm still disturbed about is as I recall, state of Idaho does not have not guilty by reason of insanity.
I know.
And if there's anybody, now she could be playing cray-cray today in court, but anyone who watched the trial and followed it, she's crazy.
Yeah.
She
She's
is crazy.
crazy. But, here's the thing. I don't know. And again, I am surprised like you that Idaho doesn't have NGI. But what I wonder, though, this was pretty compelling to me that the prosecution argued today, that there was so much planning. She planned a wedding. She planned to move her kids to Idaho from Arizona. She did move her kids. She was doing all these things that were like a normal mother would do. These are things that are anti-insanity, right? These are things that you do when you're of a normal, sound mind. You definitely, listen, I'm not a mental health expert, but I think it would be difficult to say that somebody like her didn't know right from wrong. But I think she most definitely suffered from a slew of things that essentially made her believe that these, you don't have to be insane to have mental incapacities, right? There's things below.
Just because she planned what she intended to do after she killed her kids, I don't think that makes her sane. I mean, if she was planning to get away, usually the evidence is someone's planning an escape, or someone is, knowing that they did wrong and they're planning a cover up, and so. And they go and not guilty by reason of insanity, and they say, I didn't know right from wrong. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Well, why'd you get rid of the evidence if you didn't know what you're doing?
Right.
So she's like planning a honeymoon after killing her kids. I hear what you're saying.
She also planned the move from Arizona to Idaho, and shortly thereafter they went missing.
Right.
It's, and I think I'm now very interested to see Chad Daybell's trial. Of course, he's going to go like this and point to her. She's the convicted murderer. It's all her. It was her idea. She wanted my wife dead. She wanted her own kids dead. But there's ample evidence that until she met him, she didn't make this switch, right? She was a real sort of normal Mormon mother in that community. And then she just got brainwashed, right? And so not to use that influence as a defense, but it has something to do with the change. And even the judge said, look, this woman's like 50 years old and no record. And then suddenly she's slapped with like multiple murder charges. This is not usual. Essentially he was saying there's something not right. Right. And so I wonder how much, because Chad Daybell has been saying like, oh, I'm like the hot guy. All the women want me. And like, she was like after me. And, that's kind of his theme in this defense. And so, but there's so much, there's so much evidence that he was there, that there was all the stuff that found next to the bodies were on his property. They're buried on his property. He's like, the evidence is far worse for him than it was for her.
So does he get like an unfair advantage in a sense because his trial's coming after? Like, does his team get to kind of look at, maybe a misstep in the way the evidence was presented for Lori and then try to do it a different way?
I don't think so, because look, he also has the death penalty pending against him, and I don't think it's going to come off for him. The only reason it came off for her is because the discovery was late, and the judge sanctioned the prosecution by dismissing the death penalty. So that was kind of a big gift. I don't think that he's going to get that gift. And probably one of the considerations, although probably unwritten, was that, we can get the death penalty on that guy. And we'll just let it go on her. They're going to get it on somebody. Right. And so he's looking at higher stakes because of the death penalty. I think her guilt obviously helps him. He has a scapegoat, but at the same time, I think, Jim, that, the evidence is far stronger forensically against him than it was against her. So anyway, that'll be interesting. And then of course she goes to Arizona and has to face conspiracy to murder charges with respect to her own ex-husband, who also her brother, her co-conspirator, who's dead now, also killed. So anyway, listen, my point is I always think sentences are harsh and I think people should be given a chance, but this is somebody that I just thought, if we're going to follow the law, the sentencing laws, protection, deterrence, punishment, rehabilitation, protection is the number one factor. And she clearly is a danger. she's a danger, but she has not presented the court with any mitigation or rehabilitation.
I mean, crazy or not, she does not deserve to walk on the streets
100%.
at the general population. I mean, so, and if she was found not guilty by reason of insanity, she would probably never get out of prison anyway. So I understand that. But, you know, maybe she gets treatment, maybe she won't. Who knows?
Yeah.
Before you guys get too far away from this, Sarah, you did mention to me there was a moment from the sentencing involving the judge.
Loved it.
And I spent some time getting that clip prep for you guys, so I want to make sure that we get to it before we move on to the Long Island
Thanks for
serial
reminding
killer.
us.
Yeah, no problem. That's what I'm here for. Certainly not for the legal expertise. Up until today, I thought LWOP was just like a rapper that was going to prison with all these people. You're like, yeah, she's going with LWOP. Turns out, life without parole. Never knew that. All right, so let me play this moment that came toward the end of the sentencing, where the judge was talking about really why the legal system and arguably our podcast is so important. So here we go.
You decided to take your case to a jury trial. I will state and emphasize that I firmly believe it's the right of every person in our country to exercise their right to a jury trial, and they're afforded the full due process of the law. It's been somewhat disheartening to me to realize that there are many people who think that they can predetermine a case and somebody shouldn't be afforded their full rights of due process before they are convicted of a crime. Well, I didn't make all of the rules that govern criminal cases, but I took an oath to uphold the rules that are there, and I make every effort to ensure that people's due process is protected, because that's an important duty of mine. Everyone has a right to be presumed innocent, and everyone in a criminal case does have a right to a jury trial. Sometimes I feel like maybe too many cases settle, and there should be more trials because it's a right people are entitled to exercise. You exercise that right, and I in no way hold it against you that you decided to have your case determined by a jury. That's your right, and it does not impact or influence my decision in sentencing.
Listen, Jim, as I said, he's making a record to make it clear that Lori Vallow is not being punished because she went to trial. Because you and I both know that when you do exercise your right to trial and you are found guilty, you get a higher sentence than what you're offered in a plea deal. And so he's doing that. But I also appreciate him making that record. You know, the idea that he saw this. Look, she actually had a triable case.
Billy is calling bullshit.
I know. She really did have a triable case. She had a chance if she could put her mental health and that sort of cult, the cult influence on, highlight that more. And she didn't do that because she controlled her defense. She didn't allow her defense attorneys to blame Chad, to highlight the cult influence, to put her mental. I mean, she didn't even cooperate with the PSI to get a mental health evaluation towards mitigating factors. So that's the problem, is that she had a defensible case. She's not somebody that should have pled. And so I think the judge, look, how much of that is to CYA and make a record and how much he really means, I still appreciate that he said that.
No, I do too. And I got to tell you, I've, Judge Boyce, who handled that trial, he's an excellent judge. And you know how I feel about Judge. He is an excellent judge. They're both out of Idaho.
Judge again. Judge
is looking forward to more of him. But I got to tell you, I tell every client who's like on the fence between probation and jail, you go to trial, you get convicted, your ass is going to jail.
Yeah.
I may be able to get probation on a plea.
Right.
You get convicted. See ya. I don't want to be ya. I mean, so
yeah, but of course, but of course, when you're dealing with the stakes, when you're dealing with a murder, conspiracy to murder, I mean, almost, well, I don't want to say all, but a large majority of that kind of a charge goes to trial. Because what do you got to lose? The offer is not one that, that you want to take anyway.
Yeah. Once death penalty's off the table, I mean, she's getting life without parole on a plea or a trial. So it doesn't really matter.
All right. So, our guest is Kerri Rawson today after a brief break. And I just want to briefly address the Rex Heuermann case. I mean, I think what we know is that they have very strong DNA. It's not like Kohberger. They basically got hair from inside a burlap. One of the bodies was covered in. And they also got Heuermann's wife's hair on a different body. And they traced down the car, the truck that was found near where these victims were last seen. The car seemed to be a consistent make and model. Then they ended up tracing that car to him as a registered owner. That was obviously not enough to probable cause to arrest him, but they started honing in on him and they started following him around outside his office in Manhattan. He's an architect. And they saw him taking out he had a pizza box that he was eating out of. He was eating pizza and he tosses the pizza box and they take the box out of the trash. They get his DNA off the crust and voila. He is Rex Heuermann, the serial killer, the Long Island serial killer. I am so impressed by law enforcement in this case. As much as I'm not in most cases, including Kohberger, this case, I think they have him pretty cold. What are your thoughts about this? And how much do you think, his wife and his family are impacted by the absolute betrayal of this arrest?
Yeah. So you mentioned Kerri Rawson. She is BTK's daughter, and she, we're looking forward to hearing her point of view. I do know that this defendant's wife gave a statement today and said, please respect the privacy of my neighbors, my family. Apparently, it is a media circus at her house. So you've got to feel for the family. I mean, obviously I agree with you with what we read in the press. Looks like the evidence is very strong. Mm-hmm. You wonder if he's going to, do what BTK did and plead guilty to avoid, the lengthy trial and putting his family through all that trauma. But excellent law enforcement work from what we know. So I agree with you, and I'm looking forward to hearing Kerri's perspective.
Yeah, and I'm also curious how many more bodies are out there. I have a hard time believing that a serial killer just randomly wakes up one day. I don't know, Matt. What do you think? They just wake up one day and go, I think I'm going to take a break for 10 years. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, and the victims were sex workers, and so they're very difficult to identify.
Right, and you were talking about the Peter meter, whatever, Weeder Peter, whatever it's called.
That was Peter meter. I will never forget that.
Yeah, you were talking about the Peter meter. Right. I mean, what he he didn't get a Peter meter in those 10 years. Like his weird sexual, desires and creepiness didn't stop. I mean, so I believe that, by the way, Jim,
Sarah, Dr. Whiting and I were talking about scientific experiments, and now you want to make fun of it. I don't understand.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about in this case, there was no Peter meter, nada, right? And so my
you don't know that. You don't know. He may sleep with a Peter meter for all you know.
Nah. By the way, you might have some business coming at you in South Carolina because they're investigating him there. He had a home there. He had a home in Vegas. And so they believe that there are more bodies in these other states. So you might get a call to represent Rex Heuermann, would you?
Yes, if he could afford the tab.
I think he's definitely not pro bono free.
He can afford the tab. So.
Well, I want to encourage you to take on that case because we need more listeners, and that will be a great way to help drive people to this show. And speaking of which, if you are enjoying our show, please tell a friend. We would love to grow the audience. Also, subscribe. We're on Spotify. We're on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. We're literally anywhere you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. There's video of all of this, including the clip we just showed earlier. Follow us on social at The Presumption. That's our handle for just about everything. And this was an awesome interview with Kerri, and I think our listeners and watchers are going to really enjoy it.
And so we'll be right back after a short break with Kerri Rawson. Please stay with us. Welcome back to The Presumption with me, Jim Griffin, and Matt Fondelier. And today, you see that beautiful face right there? Kerri Rawson is joining us, and I'm so excited. Kerri, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
So Kerri Rawson, for those of you who don't know her, is the New York Times bestselling author of A Serial Killer's Daughter, My Story of Faith, Love, and Overcoming. It's a memoir based on her life as the daughter of Dennis Rader, better known to the world as the serial killer BTK. And I just recently realized that's an acronym for Bond, Torture, and Kill. Her second book, Breaking Free, was released earlier this year. And since her father's arrest, Kerri has been advocating for victims of abuse, crime, and trauma, sharing her own journey of hope, healing, faith, and forgiveness. She lives with her 2 children and 2 kitty cats in Florida. Now, Kerri, it's surreal for me to even say that we're sitting here talking to a serial killer's daughter. I know you're used to this, right? You've been living this unfortunate reality for a long time, and you call yourself a writer, fighter, survivor, and advocate. And I think what's really interesting to Jim and I about you is that you are the forgotten victim. People like you who've been victimized because of the conduct of their parents or family members are a different category of what, when we typically think about a victim, we think of the victim of the crime, not a victim of the criminal, essentially. And so it's so important to amplify what you do and who you are and who the other people are out there like you, because we recently saw a similar thing happen to the Heuermann family when Rex Heuermann was apprehended for a series of murders that make him a serial killer. So Jim has a lot of questions. I think we want to start with your childhood. What was it like to be the daughter of Dennis Rader before you realized the other Dennis Rader?
Yeah, so I always call it like before and after. And so like before his arrest and after. So like, as a defense team, you're coming in right there at the arrest. So you're living in the after, but you got to go explain the before, right? For me, like if we're just talking about before, like it was a pretty normal childhood, like 3-bedroom ranch outside of Wichita, Kansas, small community. He worked for ADT and then he was a compliance officer. So he had a criminal justice degree, just like Kohberger. He was just like a normal dad. We camped, we fished. He was like the church leader. So like he did communion. He was a Boy Scout leader. So really involved in our family. So we did a lot of cookouts, campouts, anniversaries, birthdays. My mom's parents were down the street where she grew up. She moved 9 houses down. His parents were 3 miles away. He had moved 3 miles away. So like our whole life was centered, in Wichita around our family. And then I went to college when I was 18. So I grew up my whole time in the house, the one little 3-bedroom ranch, went to Kansas State. So my dad would move me back and forth all the time, like constantly moving me, picking me up for Thanksgiving, Christmas. He'd come up and get me. Then I got married in 2003. So I married my college sweetheart. My dad walked me down the aisle. A few days later, we moved on our honeymoon. My dad literally like drove the moving van, but like we didn't want to honeymoon with my parents. And so we were like, okay, you go one way and we'll go another and we'll meet back up in Detroit. That's where we moved for a job in 2003 out of college. And so he helped us move. And then I didn't see him again. We didn't see him for 9 months. So after I moved, then he started communicating with the police in 2004. So he had gone dormant. His murders were from like 74 to 91 with these big gaps. He had gone dormant with communication. And so they all thought BTK was in prison or dead. They didn't think they'd ever catch him. And he came back and started communicating with the police in 2004, playing games. I literally hadn't even been out of the house a year. My brother and I were both, he said, safe. My brother had gone to the Navy in 2004. I had moved out. So he said like he got bored. He had raised us. What is it? Just an empty house, like empty house syndrome. Like most people get a boat or something. And
right.
Like he goes and does BTK stuff. And so he said everybody had forgot who BTK was. And there was a 30th anniversary that ran the Otero murders that were in 74. And he watched that in our home. My mom and my brother said they remember him watching it. And that's when he started communicating. So actually, my brother was still in Wichita. My brother was living in an apartment, but my brother was still in Wichita when this was going on, come to think about it, for several months before he went to the Navy. So my dad was doing these communications. He took credit for an 86 murder. Then the law enforcement went and did DNA to match things. So he's playing these games, and I'm off in Michigan. So I don't even know what BTK, I don't know the acronym. It's for bind, torture, kill. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know till the summer of 2004. I found out through like ABC News online that there was like this guy they were looking for in Wichita. And so I didn't even keep up with it. I talked to my mom once about it. I got home at Christmas. I was married. We stayed with my dad and my mom. Literally, he had BTK stuff like stuck right under like our guest bed. He was using my old bedroom for like his BTK workshop. And then 2 months later, he was arrested. So
can I ask you a question about the gap is really puzzling to me. And I don't want you to share anything that is obviously not public and you don't want people to know, but do you think that like with Rex Heuermann, the last murder that they know about is about 10 years ago. And I think everyone believes that there's been more bodies that are going to get discovered, that there's no way that he just woke up one day and stopped killing. Is there any indication in the investigation related to your dad that there is a belief that, that this 10-year before he started communicating again, is there any sort of suspicion that the killing sprees continued in that gap, or is that just a real gap? Because it's really kind of bizarre to have a gap like that.
Well, right. We had always said my dad had gaps and that he was unusual that he had that much control over it, because there were gaps in the murders in the 70s. And then there's an 8-year gap from 77 to 85. He had said he's been very open about what he's done. And he wrote a book with Dr. Ramslin about it. He said that he got busy being a dad and chasing kids. He literally sent his last communication in 79 on the night of my birthday party, my first birthday party. After it, he went out and sent his last communication in 79, and he did not send another one directly until 2004. But he had 3 more murders in there. So he changed the MO. And so he changed the MO on 85 and 91. Those are the 3 I was alive for. I was a 6-year-old, and he murdered our neighbor down the street. So he changed the MO, removed her body, where his 71s, he had kept them in the house. And so they didn't link that one to him. Well, he didn't want it linked to him because it was down the street, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then he changed the MO on 91 because it was a couple miles from our house, where he actually overlapped the victims, where detectives can trace like victim connections to these guys. He hid those. So where they thought he was done in 77 and didn't know where he was, or thought he had moved somewhere, they also thought he wasn't married. They had profiled him wrong. They had assumed he was like just moving around and like not keeping jobs, in and out of prison. None of that was true. He didn't have any kind of record. So when you're talking about like somebody with Rex, well, if we go back to my father, we've said for 20 years now, my dad had gaps. Well, now we're looking at cold cases on my dad. So the question is, did my dad really have gaps? Did Joseph D'Angelo, Golden State, he had rapes, breaking and enterings, and murders. Did he have gaps, or did he only have gaps in the murders in between the rapes? So when you're looking at these guys like Rex, I don't think it's just going to be the 4. I think it's going to probably be some of the other ones, or in other areas we're seeing like all across the country, right? Vegas, maybe South Carolina. Stuff, there's Atlantic City. There's so much speculation, but there's detectives looking. So I don't know if we're going to have gaps with Rex, or honestly, when we're all done with it with my dad.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really hard to believe that somebody would just, I guess that there's this other question of, when I was looking at the victims listed in your dad's Wikipedia, it seems like they're not just female, they're also male. Are these people all random, or are they people that he may have somehow, like you said, one of them is a neighbor, but are these people that may have crossed him, or there's something went down? There was some sort of acquaintance, or nothing?
So with my dad, he was similar to Rex in that Well, okay, here's like, they're similar but different. So my dad did what he called trolling. So he was constantly out driving in Wichita primarily, which was his primary hunting grounds, trolling for victims, and he would keep potentials. And my dad kept project names. And so if you look in my dad's documents, you go read Ramsland's work, my dad probably has over 200 project names, and he kept meticulous Nazi records and notebooks. Now, are we going to see that with Rex? Are we going to see this sort of detailed Nazi information? Because basically they hang themselves. When they arrested my dad, everything he ever could have done in Wichita were in those books. Now, he used to get safety deposit boxes. He had storage. So with Rex, I'm sure safety deposit boxes are very hard to track down. My dad would put them under fake names. He would practice signatures. He had fake IDs. Now that's harder to fake nowadays. But my dad, good God, we don't even know what he put in safety deposit boxes. And if say somebody cleans those out and they don't know what they're looking at, or there still could be stuff somewhere in a bank somewhere in Kansas. We have no idea. Mm-hmm. So the reality is my dad was constantly trolling for victims randomly, and he would give them project names. So let's just say somebody lives in a house that's green. So he would call them Project Green, right? And he would consider them a potential, and he might stalk them for weeks or months or years. And then he would keep a whole list. And so when he killed Shirley Vian in 1977, she actually was not even a project. He had a project down the street. That one wasn't home. He really wanted to murder that day. He showed a photo of my brother and my mom to a kid that was related to Shirley, one of her sons. He led my dad to the house, let my dad in. My dad calls them ruses, where he would look like a repairman, he would dress up like certain things with hats and IDs, and he made like lapels and badges, and then he would get in. And so she wasn't even he hadn't even targeted on. So when you're talking about Rex, he's stalking through cyber mainly, right? Because we're in this age of technology. My dad just didn't have that technology. If my dad still was out there, he'd be doing what Rex was doing: burner phones, cyber stuff, online porn, and then Rex probably just kept a list of sex workers, and then he would lure them to him. We don't know now. Was he luring him to his house to murder him? Did he have another place? He had to have somewhere to do what he did, what I call buying, torturing, and killing. We don't know. Sure. You can't just do that in some people are you can't just do that in a car, right? You have to have a safe location. And when I talk to law enforcement, NYPD, my retired Sarge, he said he didn't do that stuff in a hotel. So where did he do that stuff?
Mm-hmm. At a dungeon somewhere, probably.
Yeah, Kerri, let me ask. I know you and your mother and brother had no idea of what your dad was capable of or did, but looking back on it, now that you do know, were there anything like red flags that now you say, oh well, it was odd that he would do that, maybe mistreating a pet or some anger or anything. Looking back on it, were there any clues whatsoever?
Yeah. So when I told you first about the before, I was telling you what I knew before the hindsight. So as soon as we found out he was BTK, I was notified in Michigan, and I went into shock. And then I quickly put together that Mrs. Hedge, my neighbor, had been murdered and it was unsolved. I said, BTK cuts phone lines. I said, I was 6. I said, I know he was gone that weekend. He was on a Cub Scout camp out. I said, Dad was not home. And it was like I was turning into the 6-year-old. As you worked with victims, you know what I'm talking about, where that adult just turns into that little kid. Right. And I was like, Dad wasn't home. I said he was on a camp out. There was storming. I slept with Mom. I wouldn't have never been in Mom's bed if Dad had been home. I said I was scared that weekend because of the storm. And I said that murder was never solved. I said she was strangled and she was found out in the woods. Now, how did I know that when I was 6? I have no idea. I shouldn't have known it, right? So it was either on the news. I know my parents were talking about it. He literally was pinning that one on her boyfriend. So I turned him in on that one. They didn't arrest him on that. They didn't have him on that one. Right. I turned him in and they called it in. So if you go back in hindsight now to that one, he had a bowling bag that was maroon and white leather. Now, my dad didn't bowl. So why did he have a bowling bag? Okay. In hindsight, when my dad had a lot of weird stuff, a lot of bags, he had hit kits, like handcuffs, bandanas, rope, these things we're seeing with Rex. It's the same thing. They have these hit kits and they have them ready to go. They keep multiple in their car closets. So he had one in this bowling bag. Well, he had set up a ruse where he was going to go. He went to the camp out. He pretended to like stuff his sleeping bag. He left. He goes to a bowling alley. He leaves his car there. He swigs beer to make it smell like he's drunk. He takes a taxi out to where we live. He walks through my grandparents' yard. He breaks in Mrs. Hedges' house, waits for her, murders her, removes her body with her car. Now, he leaves the car at the bowling alley. And they're like, why is her car at this bowling alley, right? And they don't have that component till they arrest him. So because he wanted to fit in at the bowling alley, he made a whole hit kit around a bowling bag, and I saw that bag when I was 6. But law enforcement wouldn't have known that before he was arrested. It's not like they could have put that out there. But did anybody go interview anybody at the bowling alley or ask for anybody weird? Did anybody come in here and not bowl? You know, and like you were asking about like other things.
Did he have places in the home that he was just off limits to you?
Oh, yeah. Like his closet, like he was a neat freak, but then he was really untidy in other places. But as a kid, like he could be pretty verbally violent. You were asking about that, like emotionally abusive, verbally abusive, controlling, coercive control. He physically abused my brother twice when he was like a young adult. There's other levels of abuse that I'm just learning about that I'm not ready to talk about when I was little. So like he had locked things, like he would use old suitcases and lock them, and he had containers, and you just didn't get into dad's stuff or you would get spanked. You know, my dad could be really like, sometimes he would come home and he would be dad, and then other times he's coming home from ADT in that van and he's like really angry and mad and controlling. And like my mom said, it was like walking on eggshells. And so by the time I have memory, I knew at times to be very careful with this man. Like he took his belt off when I was 4 and he snapped it at me, threatening to hit me with it. Well, he had strangled Nancy Fox when my mom was pregnant me with a belt. So when you're talking about those flags in hindsight, if you listen to any of us victims, you know, Sarah will tell you, Jim, like I'm dealing with trolls all the time on Twitter being like, how did she not know what's your deal? Right. How did Ace's family not know? Rex's family? How did my family not know? The thing is, you're talking about decades of abuse in these families, you know, and we might look really amazing on the outside, right? We had this beautiful manicured lawn. We were community. We looked good. We dressed up for church, you know, but it was about control, about how you look on the outside. And then inside you have this very messy multi-layer of domestic abuse. And you're so controlled. Like when he almost strangled my brother in front of me when I was 18 and I didn't tell anybody. Like he worked down the hall from the police and we didn't call the police. Like,
well, look, I think the more the house is in disorder, the more manicured it looks from the outside. I mean, that's just it's just how it goes. And I think what you say about in hindsight seeing these flags, it makes complete sense to us because, you know, we as defense lawyers, when we look at evidence that prosecution gives us, we look at innocent, benign uses and explanations for things that they think are, you know, evidence of crime. And so, you know, a bowling bag, I mean, I wouldn't right away think that somebody's a serial killer because they have a bowling bag in their closet. But, you know, but of course, when you think about it in hindsight, it just all makes sense. But you mentioned that you turned him in on one of these killings. There's also one of the most astonishing things about your story is has to do with your own pap smear at a doctor's office.
Oh yeah,
what is that about?
Oh goodness. So it's still in CNN wrong, and I literally wrote about it in my book, and I've corrected it a million times. It's still wrong. So what happened is in 2004. My dad's playing these games. He's dropping off communications. He's calling them dead drops, right? So he contacts the FBI, KPI. They had a whole task force, right? And they were swabbing. They had this huge DNA swabathon, which is a really interesting, like, legal thing. Like, I don't even know how legal this was because they had an unknown DNA. They swabbed like 1,000 men in Wichita, and then ran them. Like, where did all that stuff go? Does anybody know?
Wow.
Oh yeah, it was called the Swabathon. It was the most insane thing, and I don't think legally you can get away with any of that nowadays.
Swabathon?
The Swabathon. They go swab their cheek and they would run them. And these men would be like, well, what happens if like I'm BTK? And they're like, if you're BTK, we'll come arrest you. And they're like, one of them I'm not. And they're like, you won't hear from us again. They were literally swabbing like journalists. It was like insane. But they missed my dad. They were working off all these lists of possibles, and they totally missed my dad, and he should have been on many lists. Anyway, so this is going on. My dad's playing games. Everybody's afraid he's going to commit more murders. It's just the most insane thing Wichita's ever gone through, right? And my dad had been terrorizing Wichita for like 30 years, right? So it's like he holds a whole city hostage.
Right.
So he literally got himself caught. If he had not done these games, they would not have caught him until DNA caught up till now, right? So he contacts the police in like January of 2005, and he says, hey, I'm trying to like modernize and put all my stuff on disc, you know, those little old square discs we use. And he
Floppy
goes,
disk?
floppy. And he's like, can I communicate with you with a floppy? And they're like, bam, we got him. And they said, yes, of course you can send us a floppy. And he didn't send him a brand new clean one. He had put it in the Park City Library where we lived, and then he put it in the church computer where he was president. And he had done a Word doc, like a newsletter of the church president. And he thought he had deleted that. Well, it had left digital evidence, right? So he sends in this disc to these guys. They crack it in like 5 minutes. They find the name Dennis, and they find the name of our church, and they've got him because he's on the internet, right? So they're pretty sure they got him. They check everything, but they need his DNA. Well, they drive by our house. They see my brother's Jeep Cherokee. My dad had used that for dead drop, got caught on camera. So they're wanting to arrest him then. And they're like, no, we got to make sure, because they had arrested the wrong guy. Like 2 months before that guy had a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the city. So they were like, no, we cannot mess this up. So they're like, we need his DNA. So they came up with the plan. The KBI was all men. They came up with a plan to go up to my college. They got a subpoena and a warrant, and they got into my medical records. They didn't ask my permission. They didn't contact me. I would have helped them, right? I would have done anything for them. I even had handwriting samples from my dad. I could have spared them a week, and like literally they risked my mom's life and the whole community's life for a week. When we're talking about what they were doing with Rex, how long were they looking at Rex and didn't get him, right? Like they literally were putting people's lives in danger. They dig in my medical records.
Well, they're putting people's lives in danger. And then how much faith do you have in law enforcement, given all that you're saying so far?
Yeah,
first they don't get your dad, then they get the wrong guy.
Then they get in my DNA.
They get in your DNA, and then they do a swabathon. I mean, come on.
Yeah, they dug through my records, and supposedly some media reported that it was a pap smear. Well, I had a cervical polyp removed. I'm sure it was the polyp, not a pap smear. And it had to be tested, right? And it was on a slide. So they got a warrant for that. They took it to the KBI lab. They broke that apart somehow with technology in 2005. They extracted my DNA. They matched it. They called back. They said it's him. And they set up an arrest team and then arrested him. They picked him up around the corner when he was going home to have lunch with my mom, notified her, notified me and my brother in Connecticut all at the same time. And then they wouldn't let us talk to each other. Now, when you're talking about law enforcement, there was one woman, there was a DA, Nola Folston. She stood up for me and she said, you can't do this to this girl. You can't invade her privacy like that. And they overrode her. And she said, she's going to sue you guys. I didn't, but you know, and then when you're talking about law enforcement, so FBI bros, I had one guy come in. He was an accountant. He had no gun. He had a legal pad and a pencil. He comes in, he has no victim services, no idea how to notify a victim. He is alone. He had been staying outside my apartment for 2 hours. I was scared to death already of this man. He comes into my kitchen. He's like, have you heard of BTK? Now I think my grandma's dead. Now he's like, your dad is BTK. That's the second thing he says. Now I think my mom is dead. Literally in medical shock for 5 days, shaking because of basically how he notified me. And I still have CPTSD from that guy not handling things right. We had a 2-hour interview. He goes, oh, I need your DNA, right? He needed my permission because they weren't sure that other stuff would hold up in court, right?
Oh, God. Yeah, right.
And so he's like, I need your DNA. I don't know any of that other stuff. and he doesn't know how to collect my DNA. So I was like, well, I'm like, CSI, you just swab in the cheek and put it in like a zippy bag, right? And so I literally told him how to take my DNA. Well, they probably never ran it. They just needed to like cover their butts.
Yeah.
Right.
So he leaves. I have one more or two more conversations with the FBI that weekend, basically notifying me that there was stuff in our house and Dad was confessing. And it's basically like, good luck. And the FBI has never once spoken to me again. And so when you're talking about your relationship with law enforcement, we never got victim services, ever. Nobody checked on us. Nobody got us to therapy. Now the public defenders contacted us. We never talked to the DA.
But you didn't get victim services, and I'm not surprised, because like I said, you're the forgotten victim. You're not considered a victim by the system, unfortunately. And more appalling to me is that you also had your privacy rights violated. So it's all around wrong. And they had the wrong guy initially, and they couldn't get the right guy. I mean, you know, that this stuff is not, we're not making this up. This is real. It happens.
I am totally astonished. I mean, your dad's BTK, a serial killer. They got FBI profilers. I mean, Netflix is, doing Mindhunter, and you would think that they would want to spend time with your entire family.
You would think. And then there's all this stuff, Jim, going on with cold cases, and some of it's public, and about 90% of it's not. Like legally, I'm doing so much stuff right now, working with the law enforcement that wants to work with me. That the law enforcement I'm working with is not the FBI. And then I was notified how much more severe of a victim I am of my father's just this summer. From they dropped the ball. Like they didn't notify my family of how bad of abuse victims we were. They didn't go check all those records. They didn't check on those gaps on the cold cases. I mean, we could be looking at a major thing coming out in a while here with things that they messed up in 2005. And I literally tweeted the other night, I was like, I don't even know what got me all worked up, but I was like, hey, FBI, if you ever want to talk to me, hello to Quantico. It's so frustrating because I don't have a doctorate. I don't have a PhD behind my name, but I'm literally on other podcasts working with Dr. Ann Burgers, who's covered in Mindhunter, right? She's a colleague of mine. All these people are becoming colleagues of mine, but the retired FBI will talk to me, but I can't get anybody with the active badges to pay any attention to me. And it's frustrating as hell.
Hey, Kerri, I had a question for you. You mentioned at the top of this interview that there was sort of a before time and an after time. And, over the course of this first part of the interview, we've heard a lot about how you've essentially had to kind of make your life about your dad's life. And you've had to basically become a personal historian in a way. And so I guess my question is, what were your passions and hobbies in the before time? And are you able to compartmentalize a part of your life that's just for you? And are you still connected to those things that, were so important to you before your whole world blew up?
Well, it's interesting. That's a good question. Trauma, when you're talking about trauma, you lose so much. And so I always would fish and camp with my dad. We went hiking in the Grand Canyon for a week. We were out in Colorado. These are things I've lost. I've lost Colorado. I haven't been out to Colorado since my dad was arrested. Literally, I lost my dad, right? He's alive, but it's literally he died on me. I mean, I know Jim covered Murdoch, right? Buster's lost his family. There's a living person, but you still have lost most of that component. And then you have to live in the public in this component always. You're always this person's kid. I'm always BTK's kid. You never see Kerri Rawson in the headline. I don't think you're going to see.
You've also lost your childhood. I mean, you can't look back on your childhood and have fond memories. I just don't see how that's possible.
Well, you learn to compartmentalize, and in time you heal. But when we're talking about trauma, I still can't fish. I tried. I used to fish all the time with my dad. I had kept the tackle boxes and things, but then I was having trauma issues around these camping items of my dad's and fishing stuff. And my husband finally, at the time when I was married, he had to get rid of everything. I just couldn't handle it. I think I'm healed enough now. I could probably go fishing with somebody new, but it would have to be handled in a new sensitive way with new equipment. you lose all your
Jim's
memories.
a hell of a fisher, let me tell you. Off mic, tell me about fishing competition. So you got your guy right here.
It's like
it's called fishing, not catching. That's what I do.
Everything is like, I just said the other day, everything's like a muddy snow globe, right? Like everything before is all just kind of muddied and jarred and messed up. And then you have all these puzzle pieces. I'm still trying to put them together. And then you have people like, you all can deal, and I can tell in your faces you can deal because you deal with victims all the time. You deal with these insane cases and families and everything. A lot of people can't deal. And so they're not allowed in my life, or they're only allowed in my life. They're not allowed in my private life, right? I'm very careful about who can be in my life because a lot of people can't deal, or a lot of people on my sort of level, or again, Buster's level, they want to use you, right? They want something from you. They want to take something from you. People always want something, or it's very difficult thing to have to manage being this high profile.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask, did you ever have the experience that Buster's having where you can't talk to your dad on the telephone? I don't know if that was an option for you without it being displayed or sent to the media, and it's just awful what's going on with him.
Yeah, I know they're recording the calls there, and then there's like photos coming out that, I like, people were making fun of Alec, and I was like, oh wait, like there's a kid still here, right? Like there's like an adult kid, like that's his dad, and I was like, how would I feel if the photos were coming out of like my dad? And I was thinking about that because you get wrapped up in the true crime community, and then you're like, wait, this isn't funny, Right. But like, we didn't really ever have the issue. Like I didn't call him or have any communications other than letters, but early on letters were being stolen out of the jail. And some of them were put on eBay, like my letters to him. So I've always had to be really careful with my own privacy, like where I live, protect my kids. My kids are teens. They're not allowed on social media. Can you imagine telling your like 15-year-old she can't be on social media? Like she knows she just can't because it's not safe for them, because I get hit by predators all the time. I can't put my kid through that. So there's a lot of management 20 years out that you're still doing. It settles down, but then when you're so public, or something like Rex gets arrested, like everybody shows back up, and then you become really high profile all of a sudden. And like, it never goes away all the.
Let me ask you a question. You mentioned earlier that when your dad started taunting by way of these letters or communications, that he essentially gave himself away and got caught. Had that not happened, I mean, how do you think they would have, just based on your layman knowledge of DNA, how do you think they would have gotten him? Because you mentioned they would have gotten him somehow today.
They had DNA, so they were smart from the 1970s, from Otero's and the other ones. They collected DNA basically in like his like sexual specimens that he had left. And they said, hey, just collect this. And they're like, we know we can't test it right now, but someday we're being told we'll be able to test it. They maybe
but your dad was not in CODIS or anything, right? There was no. They maybe, I don't even know. I'm still trying to sort that out. They maybe put that unknown BTK in there, but they wouldn't not have matched anybody because he had never been arrested or anything else. So they have this unknown, but they were smart and they never even tested it for DNA. Because they didn't have the technology. They just held on to it literally in like a paper bag or something somewhere, right? I don't even know, because you're talking about detectives retiring, detectives dying, these cases being handed down, 3 decades of files going to these people. Like there's guys that spent their whole career on my dad, right? And so I don't even know where that evidence was kept, but somehow they had kept it. So if in 2004, he gave them 86 murder. They didn't have 86 for him. And when he gave them that, he sent in her driver's license. They had thought it was the poor woman's husband, and they had ruined his life for 20 some years, saying that he had killed his wife. Well, it was my dad. And so when my dad claimed that one, they went and they took that DNA and they matched it to the other ones. And they're like, oh, shit, right? Because they had him murder the whole time to BTK from 86 to 2005, and they didn't know. But so say he hadn't turned in 86, the family genealogy would have caught up. Say my relatives had put in DNA,
by now they would have caught him, just like they caught D'Angelo. I would have think they would have probably caught him in the last 5 or 7 years, would be my guess.
Yeah. IGG, Sarah.
Yep.
IGG.
Yeah, IGG is a pain in my ass and your ass and everybody's ass. So listen, there are 2 cases that are in the. I mean, I definitely don't want to let you go until we ask you about just your view of having gone through the system as the daughter of somebody who went through the system. I definitely want you to share just your overall view of the presumption and the role of the media on high profile cases. But there are 2 high profile cases, obviously, in the headlines, and you've commented about them because, of course, media runs to analogies, even if the cases are not analogous. And so Bryan Kohberger is one, you hit on that, and Rex Heuermann's the other one. So Bryan Kohberger, from my perspective, in terms of common aspects or facts with your father's case, so BTK and Bryan both committed random sort of home invasion murders, right? As far as we know, even though the media has tried to paint Kohberger as a serial killer, we don't have any evidence of any other murders where there's any evidence tying him to the scene, right? And I have problems with the way he's tied to the scene in this case anyway. But I see that as a common fact. And the other common fact is that he stood silent at his arraignment, just like your dad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you go around thinking that your father's case is analogous to Kohberger as it stands today, based on what we know?
It's complicated with Kohberger. What happened was that Kohberger was a student under Dr. Catherine Ramsland at DeSales for the end of his bachelor's and his 2 years for master's. And then Ramsland is the one that recommended him for his doctorate, is what I'm being told. Okay. Now, Ramsland is gagged both by the university and due to the case for her own reasons. So she can't talk about Kohberger, and people need to leave her alone on that one. Both of them were criminology students, right? They both had criminology degrees. They're both their first. All right, for now, we're going to say my dad's first. Otero's, it was 4. Bryan's supposedly was the 4. They both went into homes they weren't prepared for. My dad wasn't expecting the father to be home. He was after the mother and the 2 younger children. He ran into a father. He had to improvise. That's a word I will use. He had to improvise. He even ran out of bondage materials, and he had to improvise in the home. He had to like think quickly on his feet to come up with a way to control them. I believe Bryan was maybe going just after Maddie and Kaylee upstairs. Or even maybe just Maddie, the girls upstairs. We're not sure which one. Maybe Maddie. Kaylee, I believe, ran over or was sleeping with her. He ran into a situation he wasn't prepared for upstairs with Kaylee, in my opinion. Then he ran into a much bigger one with Ethan that he didn't even probably know was there. And Zaina was awake getting her DoorDash order. I have a feeling he maybe wanted to go in, kill 1 or 2, and leave a bunch of people surviving. Now you had a massive whodunit, right?
Yeah.
Instead, if I think on the flip side, though, once he started killing other people, if he had seen the other 2 surviving witnesses, I don't think they'd be alive. And so they're getting so much flack and so much crap, but the reality is they're alive. We can't fix dead. We can help somebody if they're alive. That's all that matters here, is that they're alive.
Yeah, but you honestly think, based on just what we know so far, not the speculation and the hype, but the facts that we're aware of, you think that because you say he, and I'm like, well, I think there could be more than one person.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm over here going to need to be eating a shoe because I've been sure it was him based on my guts. Like, I know guts are not going to hold up.
What?
And if you put me on the witness stand, you'd have me squirming hard, both of you.
All right.
You're really good at your jobs.
Okay.
I've never been up there. I'd be totally squirming because I run my mouth and then I'm like, wait, I'm going to have to eat a shoe. I've literally said, like, I'm going to have to eat a shoe if it's not him. But then, like, the thing is, they're not looking for anybody else, and law enforcement is sure. And, like, with that touch DNA, but I know with you guys, with your job, you could poke like 15 holes just in that DNA.
Right. Not just the DNA, but also, I mean, we don't know enough about the cell tower pings, where he lived was very close to this town. I mean, there's just a lot of issues and one latent footprint. I mean, it's just, it's again, there could be a lot more we don't know, but I believe that based on what we know, there's a lot of problems. So what about Rex? I mean, Rex to me was far more analogous. He didn't, he's an architect. He didn't have a criminology background, but he is definitely into bondage and torture and killing. And these are sex workers that he was hooking up with. They got him through DNA. I thought it was brilliant what they did. They got the DNA from the bodies, the hair, and then they followed him around. They nailed him down with his car as well.
And pizza crust, New York.
The pizza crust was brilliant. I mean, listen, I'm not a fan of all law enforcement, but I mean, I cannot.
That crossed the line, didn't it, Matt? That crossed the line.
I mean, a pizza crust is way better than a pap smear.
This is how you scare people. You say, listen, if you killed somebody, you are never allowed to eat a pizza again because we will find you. And I'm telling you, people are going to stop.
We got to get them to stop. I was just thinking that. I was like, we got to stop people stop doing murder and mayhem. But then I was like, Jim and Sarah won't have a job.
We'll be fine. We will be fine.
You guys would be podcast hosts. We'll find another thing to talk about. We'll talk about movies or something.
Cotton candy.
Do you think that? I mean, I think.
Sarah, can I follow up about Kohberger? So, your dad had a criminology degree. Mm-hmm. Have they? I mean, did he use that as part of his the way to get away with the murders? I mean,
so he was he was at Wichita State. He was going to night school. Okay, here's two things he did. 4 people are murdered in the Otero house. Completely unheard of for Wichita, right? Even now. So he gets a job with ADT because everybody wants security system. He needs the job. He gets a job because he committed murder. So now he's in everybody's homes that are scared of BTK, installing their alarms and writing down their codes and doing petty theft and messing with their lingerie and stealing it. Okay. And then at night he's going to WSU and he's taking classes and they're studying BTK and he's learning everything law enforcement has. Like they're teaching the kids on this case and he's in there and he's wearing Mr. Otero's watch right in front of the police. He literally took Mr. Otero's watch and wore it to the next crime scene. There was a kid that survived, a 19-year-old that almost killed my dad. My dad had been dead. I wouldn't be alive. My kids wouldn't be alive. Go play that game. It's not one you want to be in very long.
Wow.
Literally that watch Kevin Bright saw, but nobody put that together that Kevin had seen Otero's watch. I mean, if that somebody had put that together in 74, game would have been up. But my dad used his knowledge, means, methods, MO, evidence. And I'm telling you, if Kohberger is guilty, he used every last bit of his knowledge to get away with it. And when people are like, where's the blood evidence? Where's the DNA evidence? Where's this? Well, we don't know the cyber forensics. I mean, there's been hundreds of warrants in both these cases, Kohberger and Rex. We just haven't seen most of it.
Right.
There's a shower curtain missing from Bryan's house. His apartment. Did he use that to cover up the car, or is it just some newfangled kid thing not to have a shower curtain? Like, I think he was trying.
Shower curtains are nasty.
I went a whole year in college without sheets. So,
did he?
Shower curtains are nasty. They collect mold. They're disgusting. They have to be swapped out regularly.
That's your shower curtain defense.
Yeah, that's the shower curtain defense.
Plus, I've seen some luxury hotel rooms. They don't have shower curtains in there. You get everything all fogged up. It's just good living.
But that's gonna look at the crappy hotel we're gonna stay at Crime Con. I bet they don't even have shower curtains.
Oh, it looks pretty nice to me, Sarah. I'm pretty laid back and chill. It looks pretty good to me, Sarah.
Kerri, when we were getting ready for the Murdaugh trial and we were doing this focus group, so I mean, just what you said, it was with the lack of evidence and how these focus groups would address it. And they would say, of course, there's no evidence. He's a lawyer. He knows how to kill people without leaving a trace. I mean, it's the more we pointed out there's no evidence, some people think the guilty he was. I mean, that's just, it's really hard to overcome.
Alec, to be fair, I didn't really know the case too well. And I'm not a wine mom. I don't trial watch all day. I just don't have that bandwidth. So I didn't know with Alec on that part. And then I started following I was doing the instant tweeting threads. I was following those. That's where I got hooked on it hard by one of the reporters. And then I was having to go watch the clips because I was like, wow, this is. And then when things started with like the dog and the chickens and the golf cart and the blood splatter and all that, then I was like, oh, okay. But before that, really up until I actually got into the trial, I really didn't know. You could have set me on the jury for that one because I didn't know. You could have set me on the jury for Vallow because I knew nothing about Vallow until it became in jury. I totally could have sat on Vallow because I knew nothing about it. But now, but there's no way you could set me on Kohberger, and no way anybody would set me anyway, as you know, who's kid. But when you're talking about Rex, they're both 59. They'd had no arrest record. They had a wife. They had 2 kids. They had respectable jobs. They were in their community. Rex's house is a disaster on the outside and a mess. Now, Cheryl Mack McCollum, she told me that shows you that he doesn't care. He cares about those guns, right? Mm-hmm. He had like 200 some guns. So he's telling you what he cares about and what he doesn't care about. Does he really even care about architecture, or does he care about the rules of architecture? And they both bound, they both strangled. They both have a lot of the same like things that get them off, same hangups. So they're definitely more similar. I wasn't ever going to talk about Kohberger. I had never been asked anything ever in my life other than Dad, right? And I was quiet. I was writing. And then I got down in a rabbit hole with Coffindaffer, Sarah. Coffindaffer and I were in a rabbit hole chasing Kohberger chasing the suspect for months. And I like quietly lurking. I didn't public face it because you know how wild and speculative it was. And so I was down in this rabbit hole sleuthing. And then I found out about Ramsland, and like literally a statement was going to be, she was going to run something about Ramsland. And I said, no, I said, stop. I'll issue my own statement from Twitter. It was New Year's Eve. And I said, nope, stop. I issued my own statement. 30 minutes later, News Nation called me, and I became news overnight because I stood up for myself, because I said, no, I said, I love you, but you got to stop. I will handle it. I'm going to front face this. I'm going to put out a statement, because I knew I was going to become news and my dad was going to become news. I saw it. It was coming. I saw it churning. And I said, nope. I said, I'm taking control of the narrative now. And then they started asking me about Kohberger. And so I started keeping up with the case because I was being asked. So if you're being asked to commentate, and then people were asking, and then I got interested in Murdoch, and then Vallow, and now Rex, and now like this is my life.
And now you're going to Crime Con. No, you are a very important piece of this conversation. Again, it's it's not about prosecution, defense, law enforcement, the typical categories, and in that crime, true crime community. You really sort of you have a very important position and unfortunate story. And my question to you is, what is your advice to Kohberger's family, his sister, his parents, and Rex's wife and children, who have just been devastated? She just put a statement out begging for privacy. She filed a divorce. She's trying to get as much of her normalcy back, if that's even possible. And she's begging for privacy. So what is your advice to them going through this, since you experienced it?
Well, and it applies to Buster too. Anybody high profile, like, one, you got to get into therapy, trauma therapy, like high level. So I'm back in it now. I'm with a CCTP, a certified like trauma professional. It's a certain level. You want to look for those initials. You don't want to go do talk therapy. You need the high level guys that do stuff with like first responders and law enforcement, war veterans that can do EMDR, work with PTSD. You're looking for that level. Don't go to just a talk therapist. You have to start high at the trauma therapy level that have like an academic understanding of trauma. So you don't even mess around. I can't do talk therapy anymore.
What's it called? CTTP?
CCTP, like a certified trauma professional. I'm missing a word in there, but like, I'll send it to you what it means, Sarah, okay, what those acronyms mean. But like, I can't do talk therapy anymore. So I'm working like on a higher level where we're basically rewiring my nervous system. So you have to start in like high level trauma therapy, and you need to start like the day of, like there needs to be like social work, like somebody need to come in with Rex's family and offer social work services. So if victim services from like law enforcement or legal can't come in, bring in somebody like an advocate, a victim advocate with social work experience to help you navigate all these legal things, the financial things, the therapy things, your appointments, manage all of that for you. So you need somebody to come in. Mm-hmm. Then you need help with your privacy. So like Heuermann's family, they need to lock down on their privacy. I literally pay for a service online every month that grabs all of my private information that's like on 300 websites and locks that out. It's like $25 a month. Most people, you just get a service and you lock all that private information down. Then, unfortunately, if you don't have people coming in to help you, you have to ask for help. I thought I was going insane for 2 years. I had PTSD. I was having flashbacks. I thought I was mentally insane and needed to be locked up. I finally dragged my butt to therapy. She gets out the DSM to read it to me. She's like, no, you have PTSD. You're not insane. Mm-hmm. Right? So I literally had to ask for help. Like my mom had to seek out pro bono help to get a divorce, deal with a lawsuit with a victim's family. There's people that would help us, but they don't necessarily, like with Rex's family, we don't know what Asa needs. But then like you're even like bothering them to ask them what they need. And when you're in something, you don't know what you need. So you have to somehow bridge that gap. Mm-hmm. And then it's just a matter of like issuing statements is very smart. So for all your clients with this high profile state, like things, Kohberger and Asa, they both issue statements that got like, and they have lawyers. They have a family lawyer. That's huge because they can manage media. They can issue statements. They can help you with finances, and they can be that block between you and the media. Mm-hmm. And so I think just even issuing statements is huge because it just shows that you're not hiding anything, and that you're supporting your family. And then you need help with courts. And so you need that support of like security, knowledge. Like the public defender's office were great with my family. They called us, they interviewed us, they were supportive. They would pick us up from the airport if we needed it. They walked everything with us. Now it was a short thing because my dad pleaded guilty, but it's just, you just have to step in and do what you can as a person. And that's what I'm finding now with advocacy work. Yeah. I can't just expect somebody else to do it. Unfortunately, it puts a lot back on you and you learn who to work with and where to move things. I'm always moving these components of things around, but it's
see, you mentioned, this is what I was going to sort of plant the seed for you. I'm always a thinker for other people. I don't really do a good job for myself, but the public defender's office that you had a really great experience with, unfortunately, when you're dealing with bigger cities and counties, they're inundated. And as much as they want to be helpful, they may not get to everybody and everybody's families. And so my suggestion, and we could talk about this off the record, is I really think that you should put together some sort of a national educational thing that you pitch to the counties, to the presiding judges in different counties across the nation, that they could incorporate as victim advocates, people like you, that you could train people that could provide that service. Because right now we have the traditional victim advocates who come into court with victims of, let's say, domestic violence, child molestation types of accusations. But we really, and that's why I call you like a forgotten victim, is because we forget that you're a victim. And you get called to testify, you get dragged for all kinds of stuff. And there needs to be somebody advocating for you, right. People like you, and I think that you're so brilliant with this and you're so courageous in sharing your story that I would really seriously think about, making this a thing, because there's definitely a need for it. Do you think that Rex Heuermann's going to plead out like your dad did so quickly?
Well, there's, and then I want to get back to standing silent really quick if we have time. But with Heuermann, I wonder if he confessed in that hours after, because he was arrested Thursday night, right? And we didn't know till Friday morning. I'm wondering if he confessed before he lawyered up, right? Because my father actually had a 30-hour confession, and then they were pretty much done with him, and they gave him and we couldn't afford a defense at all, obviously. And we basically made him indigent. We had him sign everything over to my mom. She took control of all the finances, the house, everything. That's a really smart thing to do when you don't have money. We didn't have any. We basically gave him to the state and said, here you go. Like, he's your problem now. I don't know. He could have confessed in that time period. If he did, then I expect him to take a plea. The thing is interesting. I'm hearing that he's very quiet in prison. He's not engaging with everybody. He's very peaceful. He's not causing any problems. What is it? Like when you say like somebody goes and sleeps, like they're probably guilty because they're not, he's not acting like an innocent man. And with that DNA, we know he's not. He's not on those 4. Now, beyond that, we don't know. And I don't know if they're ever going to be able to solve all those with like the bodies being cut up and everything if they don't get some help from him. Now, he could do the right thing like my father and confess and help them and clear those things. It would actually be helpful. It would be something, as a defense, you could say this would be really helpful. Like, you're done on these 4. What else do you have? And let's help these families. But you have to approach these guys like respect. You have to be, as you know, if you're working with like a criminal or somebody being accused of crime, you can't approach them like they're insane and mad or crazy, even if what they've done is insane and crazy. You have to approach them with respect and just treat them like normal. Just like with anybody, if you approach somebody with respect, you're going to get respect back. So if you can approach him or my father, or any of these guys, with respect, you're going to
we always say, look, our clients might have done the most heinous things, but when you do what we do and we get to talk to these people over and over again, the craziest, most heinous crime committer is just another guy. I mean, really, you're having a conversation about normal things like what you do with a normal person, And so, I mean, it's really hard for people that are not in the job to wrap their head around the normalcy of that, but you really, when you do what Jim and I do, we're dealing with the humanity, right? And with the idea that we're flawed, but it's just another guy. And it's not like some extraterrestrial monster.
No, they all call these guys monsters, but they're not monsters. They look just like anybody. That's why you don't find the psychopaths. Right. They
but I don't think anybody. I disagree with you on Heuermann. I don't think that he's confessed because I remember his lawyer saying immediately after his court appearance that he was crying and that he said he didn't do these things. So I don't know. I mean, that's what the lawyer said.
Before we finish, Kerri, I want to ask maybe a sensitive question, but was the death penalty an option in Kansas at the time that your dad was being prosecuted, and did he avoid it by doing a plea, or was it just not an option?
It was not in play, and that is where we think a gap has come in. We think he my father fears death more than anything. Like, he was the biggest baby when he would get sick. Okay. Like, he thought he's been dying forever, and he's 77. He used to drive my mom crazy because he always thought he was going to die. He kills people, but he's scared of death. Don't explain it. We think on record he stopped because of that death penalty did come in place somewhere early in the 90s.
Right.
Okay. Now we're looking at cold cases. Interesting thing. We're looking at a cold case in Oklahoma. That's public. That's been in the news. We're looking at one in Missouri.
Against your dad?
Yeah. 76, a missing person, and 90, a body that was found. Those are unsolved. Now, death penalty has always been in play. Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma. Now we have a problem. Cold case problem. Did we think that there were gaps, and was he avoiding the death penalty? Because I'm being told, speculative, say you kidnap somebody in Oklahoma in 76. What if you move what if you move them alive to Kansas? If you kill them in a non-death penalty state, would you have the death penalty? If you've killed them in a non-death penalty state and say you move their body back to another state, would the death penalty apply? I don't think so. That's what I'm being told. I don't know. So now we got to go. We're going back and looking at everything.
Interesting,
like including the location of the murder,
location, dates, everything's on the table again for my dad.
Wow.
What do you think of the? We're about the presumption here, right? And that's why we felt strongly about starting this podcast and the idea that the media convicts everybody. It wasn't so bad when your dad was going through his his charges, but it's really bad now. I mean, I think that the intense interest in true crime that leads ironically to gag orders that then fuels the speculation is just out of control. And so we were not too long ago on Good Morning America, Jim and I, talking about this. What's your take on it? You're commenting on these different cases because of your experience. You're on Twitter. You see all kinds of different characters. What is your stance?
It's a hard one because I'm part of that churn, right? I've been thinking about that because like I was being pulled in to talk about Kohberger, and I try to be careful. I try not to go into like Reddit land or 4chan land. Now, when you're running a rabbit hole with somebody behind the scenes to that level, you are in everything, especially before the arrest. You're running every possible thing you could, basically being a mini investigator. I lurk in the Facebook groups right now. I take Facebook tea as an advocate. I get it to media to get pieces on a story or get eyes on domestic violence that's gone bad, stuff like that. That's stuff I do every day. But I try to stay above the bar and lurk. So anything you're seeing me public face, I try to be careful, but of course I have my moments where I'm running my mouth too. The question is, am I making it worse? When I was pulled in on Kohberger, I was pulled into these things that I had no idea what I was being pulled into and how big they were going to be. Because when the judge is saying we've got a gag order because of all these online sleuths and everybody talking, I'm part of that, right? Mm-hmm. So like, I don't know how Kohberger gets a fair jury at this point. Yeah. Like you're going to have to move it out of that small county. Now Vallow did, but Kohberger's so much bigger. I really don't know how he gets a fair jury, how you find 12 people that can be fair on this one, especially with the murder of 4 college students. Mm-hmm. The reality on the other side is, I used to not want to work with media. I hid from them for 10 years. I hated them. I hated law enforcement. I hated lawyers. I hated everything to do with crime. The thing is, I was dying and rotting inside by not talking. And when I started talking, who came into my life? Journalists, detectives, lawyers, criminologists, forensics. Because when I said before, you guys can all deal, right? You can... Right. And I learn every time I work with people like you all. And so and then it makes me better human, and it makes me better at my jobs. It makes me a better victim advocate or a better speaker or crime solver, right? So I don't know where that balance is. I think where I landed for myself is I'm only responsible for what comes out of my mouth. So if I'm on a content thing and somebody else is over here, if I'm on media at night and I'm paired up next to somebody, I'm only responsible for what's coming out of my mouth. And I can't fix the edit. I can't change the content. If somebody wants to put me on YouTube and edit me down next to like graphic photos, I'm not in control of that. Right. I try to work with top tier people.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I read your tweets, and you're very fact based. See, that's what matters. It's you can earlier you said whatever you think Kohberger's pretty much. You said Kohberger's probably guilty, but you can opine however you wish, right? It's when the facts are like twisted and misrepresented.
Oh, it drives me nuts, Sarah. And I'm literally in DMs. I'll even hit a criminologist. I'll hit high profile people I'm working with. Like I'll literally say, no, you're not. Like, don't do that, or that's not right, or remove that, or take that off. And they're like, who are you? And I'm like, look, we all have to hold each other accountable, and I expect it right back. Right.
I think it's a sense of collective responsibility that needs to bring some balance to that. Anyway, you guys, do you have anything else for Kerri? Oh, Matt, can we plug her book? Her two books,
it's just the first one. I'm still writing the second one, but it's for pre-sale. So.
Oh, the second one's not out?
No, I'm still on, and I'm way behind. It's for pre-sale. The first one.
Oh, got it. Okay, Can we put up Kerri's first book? Because I ordered it on Amazon. Everyone can get everything on Amazon and anywhere else you get your books, but it didn't.
Yeah, right now on Amazon, if you're a member, you can get it for free on Audible. Yeah. If you sign up for 3 months of Audible.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do we have a picture of the cover, Matt?
He did.
Yep, putting that up right now.
Oh, and did we want to talk about Standing Silent real quick? Did you want to?
Oh, yeah. Please definitely address that, because that was one of the things that people kept saying, oh, just like BTK, Kohberger standing silent. And I know why he stood silent, but what do you have to say about it?
Well, I actually forgot about my dad. Somebody else pointed it out, and then I had to go wiki it myself. But for my dad's case, he actually was very upset that day because he was going back and forth in letters and in phone calls and family visiting, because we all knew he was guilty. We had been told, we had the evidence right in front of us, literally. Like, we knew. And my dad says, well, I need to see the evidence. And we're like, you did the murders. What do you need to see? It's so stupid to say, what do they have on me? I'm like, dude, you did them. You know what they have on you. Anyway, he was trying to decide if he wanted to plead guilty or take his risk with the trial. And we said, no, you're going to put all our family through everything in the community and just stop. We know, just be man up and take your guilty and be done with it. So he didn't know what he wanted to do. So he stood silent because he is such an anal rule follower. He refused to be on record as saying he was not guilty. He didn't want that coming out of his mouth. That's my theory. And so he had his lawyer do it, or the judge. He's crying. You see him like he's in tears, and he barely ever cried. He is so upset at that moment because he didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And then he went in like 6 weeks later, 2 months later, and he took his guilty. So I think for Bryan, it might be that he's a rule follower. He didn't want that on record that he's not guilty when he is guilty, or he needed more time. You know, for a while I was like, oh, is he going to plea or make a deal? Because if I am completely wrong and I need to eat a shoe and there's more people involved, could he be a witness? Could there be some kind of deal in place? I mean, I'm sort of hearing those rumors. It's speculative. But then would the defense be throwing everything at the wall right now? I don't think so.
I've never seen the defense. I know they get judged for throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. I think the defense is extremely thorough, and a lot of what they do is to set a record for appeal that may not stick at this point, but it's for the record. But my theory on him not pleading not guilty is a couple of reasons. I think one, we knew that this challenge to the indictment by grand jury was coming. And I think that was one reason he didn't want to plead either way, right? Because he was going to ask for the court to throw out the indictment. The second reason, I think, is also because the cameras are so focused on every breath he takes, everything about him. And the victims want him gone forever and ever. So want him to get the death penalty, according to Gonsalves's father. So I think that a lot of it also had to do with that sort of, it's just, God forbid he's found guilty, right, down the road, and he's standing there in front of all these victims and saying not guilty. It's just hard to reconcile. And I think that could very well be another reason. Why do you think Jimmy stood silent?
I would have my client stand silent if voice recognition was an issue and you don't want his voice to be publicized, all over the international media. But I haven't heard any evidence of hearing the killer's voice, but you never know.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that.
I just don't like questioning. Here's the deal. I don't like questioning things that defendants do when they have the right to do it.
Well, it's because
the other day we were talking about a defendant who decided to plead and not go to trial. He pleaded to LWOP, right? This is a case in LA, a murder case here, a love triangle. And it's like, okay, that's his right. It's his right to exercise and go to trial. And on the flip side, it's his right not to go to trial. But every time we hear anything in a case, we're like, well, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Why did you do that? It's like, so, and Kohberger, man, he can't fart without it being like, why did he fart? Did he eat too many beans from the commissary or what?
Yeah, I think part of it is the gag. It almost does an injustice. Like, you put that gag there, right, to try to give him a fair trial, but then all the speculative stuff comes out. There needs to be a balance. And the Idaho courts, they are so rough, so tight with like victim impact statements. We're seeing them like with Vallow, not everybody could talk. They're so tight with cameras and courts, but honestly, there's so much stuff going on in Idaho. They're just like, forget it. They're like, we're clamping down within our tiny courthouses and we're done with it. I think there's got to be some kind of balance with the gag.
I agree, because I think a lot of the problem is the gag. I think a lot of the problem is that the interest is leading to the gag order, and then the gag order is not stopping that inquiry. It's actually fueling speculation in response to the inquiry. And we talked about that on GMA with Jim. And I think that we need some sort of a middle ground, because right now, the inquiry doesn't stop. The sleuths are working. People are inquiring. There's the true crime community wanting to know everything. And not knowing anything is really not good. So
right. And you have sleuths now. Like, we didn't have this problem with my dad Like it's getting to the level that these people are reading like every little tiny bit of the court documents coming out and trying to like word by word. And I'm like, I don't even know what most of this means. And like, you have people that are like expert, like amateur sleuths on Twitter or on YouTube on just Kohberger. And that's all they're on. They're not on anything else. They're literally obsessed with just that case, like that level. And they will hold you to account. If you don't cross your T right, they hold you to account and they'll cancel culture you over it.
Yeah. No, totally. You guys, what else do we have for Kerri? For today, because I think she's going to come back very soon.
Kerri.
Yeah, we definitely got to have you back on. It was
amazing. I loved, like, this is a nice panel. It's relaxed and chill and informative. And we didn't even get into all like the law stuff. So
you're very impressive. And you should be proud of what you've done in the face of such horrendous experiences. Really.
Yeah, no, you really are an inspiration. I think that there's more for you to do. You obviously have a big platform. You have a great platform, but I think that what you do is so important and just not available to people, and so we have to think of a way to showcase that. Obviously, we could talk over, if you want to have beer, you have that with Jim. If you want green juice, that I would be the right person maybe at Crime Con.
Yeah, well, I never usually lock in a time to meet with people at Crime Con because it's so chaotic and everyone's like, hey, let's have a beer, let's have a dinner, and you're like, am I having a beer with like 100 people? Like, right. Like, yeah, but I'll totally be there and we can talk.
Yeah, no, we're doing a podcast we're actually recording our podcast there.
Oh, nice.
Friday night. Yeah. And then Jim and Dick are doing a Murdoch presentation.
Oh, good.
I don't know when. Do we know when, Jim?
I think it's Saturday sometime.
Okay, Saturday.
Well, Kerri, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good meeting you, Tim. I really appreciate it. Getting to meet you.
We'll have you back on soon because there's so much that you can add to this continuing conversation.
Yeah, you're welcome to pick my brain, Sarah, or if you need ideas for other hosts other guests to come on or something, Absolutely. Just holler at me, Sarah. For sure. And thank you to all our viewers and listeners. You can find us across all platforms. Please subscribe, give us stars, give us reviews, all that good stuff. And also on YouTube, which is separate, where we have our video component on. You can also review us and comment there. If you have ideas you want us to cover in future podcast episodes, we love to hear from you. And until next week, we're going to, Jim, rest.
We rest.